So we appreciate you being here. And I'd like to now introduce the titles and authors for the presentations today. So we'll be starting off with soon-to-be Dr. Doreen M Hatcher with her work titled Gender Racial Experiences of Black Women Students at Hispanic Serving Institutions, followed by soon-to-be Dr. My Kou Chang, a narrative inquiry on the experiences of Hmong men in high school. So I'll go ahead and turn this over to Doreen.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. Can y'all see my screen? Excellent. Okay, well, I'm going to do my best not to talk super fast because I tend to do that, especially when I'm nervous. But thank y'all for joining us for this session. As I take a deep breath, I'm going to start off with an overview of my study background, some relative literature highlights, as well as my theoretical framework. Diversity research on the college experience focuses more on students who are women, Black men, and students of color, and less specifically on Black women. Furthermore, these studies on Black students are located on PWIs, predominantly white institutions, or HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. Therefore, more research is needed to explore the experiences of Black women students at Hispanic Serving Institutions. The aim of this study was to explore the gendered racial experiences of Black women attending HSIs. As a phenomenological inquiry, my main guiding question was, what are the gendered racial experiences of Black women attending an HSI? And to dig deeper, I also explored what it meant to be a Black woman at an HSI and how Black women supported each other on campus. This slide lists the main topics from relevant literature reviewed for my study. As you can see, there are several here, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to my main literature, which is Black feminist thought. Feminism is viewed as the white women's movement because it overlooked racism. Yet Black feminist thought gives voice to Black women who have been silenced by gendered racial oppression. According to Patterson et al., it also provides a Black women's standpoint, which is a way of knowing developed by living, surviving, and thriving within multiple forms of oppression. Black feminist thought themes include empowerment of Black women, deconstruction of racism, sexism, and classism, intellectual thought and political activism, and resistance and transformation of daily discrimination. It also provides an Afrocentric feminist framework, which I will discuss more in a moment. So for my methodology, my study design, I chose a phenomenological inquiry to understand the lived experiences of participants through an in-depth data collection process in search of making meaning from interview responses. This approach also supports examining the phenomenon through the lens of Black feminist thought due to the intersectional nature of the participants. Black feminist thought provided an Afrocentric feminist framework that aligned with phenomenological methodology by making meaning of the participants' lived experiences, creating knowledge from dialogue or interviews, and demonstrating care and accountability throughout the research process. The hermeneutic approach describes how one interprets the text of lived experience after identifying themes to capture the meaning of a phenomenon, and like Black feminist thought, gives voice to the participants' experiences. Phenomenology facilitated researcher trustworthiness with the participants based on the relationships I built from multiple interviews. I used purposeful selection to recruit Black college women adults attending HSI campuses in the California State University. I pre-selected 16 campuses with a majority Latinx population, sending more than 80 emails to colleagues for referrals and 14 emails to Black student leaders. I also shared a recruitment flyer with Black student organizations via social media. Interested participants were sent a link to the screening questionnaire via Qualtrics. 14 individuals started the form, but only 6 completed it and 1 declined to participate. 5 participants from 4 campuses consented to participate in 3 sets of in-depth, semi-structured interviews conducted via Zoom, resulting in more than 15 hours of data. Interviews were transcribed automatically using Deduce and manually reviewed for accuracy. I used the hermeneutic circle model, which is an iterative cycle of reviewing data with participants to check for meaning and identify themes. Hermeneutic phenomenology emphasizes the relationship between the researcher and the data. Black feminist thought as a methodology aligns with hermeneutic phenomenology as a means of interpreting the text from participants' first-person accounts to give voices to their lived experiences. Qualitative inquiry incorporates multiple sources of data and provides inductive data analysis. It also provides first-person accounts of participants' meanings and is an emergent design that evolves as the study unfolds. Qualitative inquiry also utilizes a theoretical framework presenting a holistic interpretation of the participants' lived experiences. To ensure reliability, I compared the transcripts with observation notes from post-interview reflections, journal entries, and audio recordings. With each interview, the participants and I became more comfortable with each other, resulting in the use of colloquialisms and filler words, many of which were edited from the report to minimize distractions from the dialogue. Also, open-ended questions increased credibility as we engaged in conversations to provide first-person accounts of their experiences. I used pseudonyms for participants and their campuses to protect the identity of the participants and change names of campus events, departments, or personnel. There were a few limitations to my study, which involved the Black Lives Matter summer protests, which started before my study began, so I'm not aware of any impact they may have had on the study, and the coronavirus pandemic and quarantine limited all interactions with participants to virtual or electronic communications. I also didn't explore other Black women identities, non-majority Latinx institutions, or class socioeconomic status. So there were three major themes that resulted in my research. The first sub-theme is campus support systems. There was an expectation of support from campus leaders and staff of color, which eventually led to disappointment, anger, or disillusionment when not met. Being the only one in spaces was another theme that came from the research. Marley said, "I'm always scanning to see if there's any other Black people." This also resulted in loneliness and isolation. Experiencing diversity on campus is a third sub-theme where Black students felt a responsibility. Black students were responsible for programming their own events. And there was also an erasure of Blackness in the name of multiculturalism. Karen commented on this by saying, "It's funny using the word diversity because now people getting washed out with diversity." I also asked participants how their experience might be different if they attended other types of institutions. And in response, they said attending an HBCU would be more fun. They would have more support and be around like-minded individuals. The second theme of navigating multiple identities on HSI campuses started off with the students being racially socialized as a child. They learned messages from their parents growing up, and that helped them embrace their Blackness early in childhood. And they were able to express their Blackness on campus with natural hairstyles, although they were still getting comments about their hair. One student in the study had intersecting identities where she was a parent and had personal issues with her daughter, which affected her grades. She was a full-time employee who had to sacrifice time from work to attend classes and complete assignments. And her spouse was not very supportive of the experience, so that resulted in them ending the relationship. Battling gender racial stereotypes. Whoa, what just happened? Sorry. I was dead. Battling gender racial stereotypes caused exhaustion for the women. Marley said she felt like she was always a walking target on campus, where Nova said she was a teacher said to her he was surprised she was on time for class. And then also being white was another identity, so to speak. Elise was told by family members, "Oh, you're such a white girl." And Marley said that if she gets mad and talks to you like a respectful human being, then apparently she's acting white. The final theme had to do with caring for Black women on HSI campuses. They deal with a lot of emotional stress. 4 of the 5 study participants actually started therapy during their college experiences. They wanted to cultivate sister-sister support by creating spaces for each other to be in, and they also exercise self-care and other care by seeking out therapy, looking for ways to interact with other Black women, and surrounding themselves with positive, supportive people. So my major discussion points include, and I don't know if this is going to work right. HSIs struggle to retain Black students. HSIs continue to have a majority white student population and therefore sometimes operate as a PWI, and therefore Black students still experience racial discrimination and prejudice. Black women experience racism, Black women experience racism and sexism. Therefore, they experience college differently from Black men, white women, and other women of color. That has to do with gender racial microaggressions and being the only Black person in class while also fighting stereotypes. The lack of tenured Black faculty is another deterrent for retaining Black students. Black women students are often forced to choose between multiple identities, as I just shared, and Black women students experience racial battle fatigue. So implications for policies: HSIs must create intentional recruitment strategies for Black women faculty and staff. This will enhance the Black college woman experience by providing additional supporters and mentors on campus. Findings also suggested that Black college women experience microaggressions from students, faculty, and staff. Therefore, a comprehensive anti-Blackness training program should be mandatory, but the campus must be sensitive to the participation of Black students in the training as to if it's necessary and what role they would play. And also, HSIs are minority serving institutions. Therefore, integrating the MSI identity with the HSI designation will benefit all marginalized students. Findings show that Black students believe that HSIs do more for Latinx students than they do for other student populations. This study has implications for student affairs practitioners, faculty administrators who work as related to designing policies and programs to address the effects of gendered racial microaggressions on Black college students. In particular, Black college women, excuse me. So some implications for practice include comprehensive anti-Blackness trainings. I'm sorry, this is not moving forward. There we go. To encourage social justice discourse outside of formally structured activities, increasing visibility of Black women students by holding physical or counter spaces for them to hear each other and be heard. As I mentioned, embracing an MSI identity, hiring more tenured track Black faculty, and also hiring and promoting Black women administrators for executive positions. They also have experience with gendered racial experiences themselves, so that would definitely help with the challenges that Black college women face on HSI campuses. Additionally, encouraging Latina faculty to participate in programs for Black college women by partnering with Black faculty on courses, advising student organizations, and collaborating on student programs and activities. And finally, supporting Black women and faculty and staff who are doing the work. They're also experiencing their own gendered racial microaggressions and other challenges as they are supporting students who are going through these. Implications for research: I suggest future research can focus on utilizing intersectionality theory to include class and sexual orientation, exploring intersectional identity of Afro-Latinas on HSI campuses, focus the study on campuses with non-majority Latinx student populations, and exploring experiences of larger Black student populations at Hispanic Serving Institutions. Whew. So thank you. And I will stay on the line after my Kou's presentation in case anyone has any questions, or I'll answer any in the chat.
Thank you so much, Doreen, for your research and your presentation this morning. I do hope you have questions, and I will ask that you hold those off until My Kou presents her work. So we'll go ahead and thank Doreen for your presentation, and we'll turn the time over to My Kou. Thank you, Doreen.
All right, welcome. I hope you can see my purple screen. I didn't realize that Doreen and I were matching today in our color choice. So welcome. I appreciate that you all decided to join Doreen and myself on hearing, the experiences of colored people in education. And so really thank you for that. My name is My Kou Chang. And so With today, for my presentation, I really want to be able to share my research. And so it is my hope that as a participant, these are some of the objectives that you'll hopefully take away with you. For today, I really want you to be able to understand some of the experiences of Hmong men and how their history and gender roles have impacted and influenced who they are today, especially as a high school counselor. And then also, I hope that from this research, you recognize that race continues to impact decisions and pursuits of Hmong men, and perhaps, other individuals in similar situations out there. And hopefully my recommendations at the conclusion of the presentation will serve as strategies to move in the right direction towards supporting young men, or in general, young men of color. So with that being said, before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. To me, this is very important for you to know as a participant or as an observer or viewer, so that you're not only hearing the stories of the Hmong men that I spoke with and interviewed, but that you also realize as a researcher, this very topic also reflects who I am, my thoughts, beliefs, and experiences, as also a Hmong woman who's within this community alongside these Hmong men high school counselors. So a few about me is, of course, I'm a Hmong woman. I am both a high school counselor and a community college counselor. And so with that being said, I kind of, wear two hats of a great counseling profession. I am also US born, meaning I was born right here in California, actually, right here in the Central Valley. And of course, the last I'd like to share with you is that I do come from a large family. I have a total of 9 other siblings. There's 10 children. I'm number 9 in that list. And I have 7 brothers, 2 sisters. So that's gonna kind of give you an insight of who I am as a researcher for this case. So with that, let me get this going. I want to identify and kind of explain the issue that I saw. The problem as a high school counselor and community college counselor, I see on average probably more young women seeking counseling support rather than young men. And so it's not to say that, young men in general don't seek counseling support for academic help and whatnot. They do, but the rate is far less than young women. And so especially in high school, just knowing that, the population between the genders are pretty, almost the same, it's hard to see that where are these students? How come they're not coming for support? So what makes this even more pressing is that if we examine graduation rates, such as Fresno State's, we're seeing that, upon graduation, our Hmong men are less than our Hmong women as well. And so that's something that we have to take into consideration. How does everything impact each other, high school to higher education institutions? And so this signals to me that there's a lack of support and resources somewhere along that way of education. And personally for me, because I have 7 brothers and only 2 other sisters, when I look at our education and attainment, even though there's more brothers, our sisters are, 2 have gone into higher education. And then our brothers, yes, we have 3 that have gone into education, but that's 3 out of 7 brothers. And so that makes me wonder, how can we really put this into perspective and really find the support needed? Because if you examine this circle that I have in front of you, there's about 300 million Hmong in the US. From there, in California alone, we're looking at 91,000. And then in Fresno County, which, contains multiple cities, we're looking at 35,000. So that's about a third of California's Hmong count. But when we look at the local Fresno County and look at the Hmong counselors, there's about 30 Hmong counselors, that's both women and men, functioning in Fresno County. And Fresno County has our Hmong population. But when you break that even further and look between the genders, there's less than 10 Hmong US, high school counselors in Fresno County. And that speaks a lot to why I wanted to really truly look into this to figure it out. So in looking at the history and the literature to build up on my issue, I first examined the history of the Hmong people. Hmong are a part of the Asian race, we know that, but they migrated to the US during a different time as opposed to other ethnic groups. So there's two waves. The first wave were Chinese and Japanese. They came here, to really try to make a life for themselves. They elected to come to the US for some of them, but the Hmong were kind of that second wave of migration, and we here as refugees from the war and everything back in the countries. And so those are distinctions that we also have to note, even though we're all Asians. What ties all Asian groups together is the idea that their identities are partially built on, what kind of career they obtain, how much education they can achieve, and then the whole idea of saving face. That's a really big concept in the Asian communities. And so if I can elevate myself to this certain career, that gives my family reputation. It saves us face for that education. So when Hmong are viewed under this larger umbrella, though, specifically in educational environments, they are often viewed as a proficient student under either the model minority myth or a bad student under the deficit lens that they can't read or write, or that they become a gangbanger. They can't do school, basically. And so those are some of the things that I found in the educational literature that's been, kind of looking at Hmong. But we must also not forget that, Hmong parents all believe kind of in that American dream. So education then becomes a really important factor into any Hmong's life. But it's also important to note that due to the war, Vietnam War, Secret War, and Laos, the Hmong's involvement in the CIA, there's lasting effects such as PTSD and mental health issues that are among these communities. And so those are some of the things that I revealed and looked into for the literature. And the last thing is that we can't forget that Hmong men's role has drastically shifted. Because if we look at what they used to do in the past, they were the breadwinners for the family. But now, having migrated to US, the women have the trade skills to actually bring income. And so when our first wave of Hmong came to the US, there was a dramatic gender role shift, and that impacted them as well. And that could be traces that are still present here. So what I wanted to learn more and find more about, the question on your screen right now shows my research question that guided a lot of the work that I did. And so that's what I did, which led me to identify, eventually factors that did influence these particular moments who were high school counselors and making why they became a high school counselor. So to provide some brief background, you'll notice here that, I did conduct this research through the Asian critical lens. And this has 7 tenets that kind of covers like, how did race impact the Asian? What are in their stories that reveal about their race and their voices? How does their identities intersect, and how do they manage all that? All of this was kind of how I viewed the research. And then my participants, they were purposely selected. Of course, they had to be Hmong men with a PPS credential and from working full-time as a high school counselor in Fresno County. And so what I did was I really just went to Fresno County Office of Ed's website to identify all the different school districts within Fresno County. From there, I went to each district's website and each high school that those districts had, and I identified these participants through their surname, so their last names. If it was a Hmong last name, then I shot them an email to introduce my study and asked if they would be interested in participating. So that was a participant. And once those participants agreed, I went ahead and had them do a demographics questionnaire to kind of gather who are you, what's your age, and whatnot. And then I did a one-time interview of 45 to 60 minutes with them. All for a telephone, because COVID, just like a lot of my other colleagues mentioned, it impacted the way we can conduct interviews. So all my participants did telephone interviews with me. And after data was collected, what I did was I went ahead and used constant comparative to guide my coding and analysis process, and ended up with 7 themes and 3 factors. So with that, I'd like you to briefly see what participants were. There were only 4 of them, but while you may think this number is low, overall in Fresno County, there were actually just 9 Hmong men counselors. And so the important thing to note is that, even though the number is small, it provides a lot of detail and depth into their stories and their experiences as Hmong men high school counselors. And so that's how I came to discover what their stories were and how we can continue to support this group. So my themes that popped up, my first theme was that family impacted, they shared a lot about their families. And so family definitely impacts them. And even though they were told to do, this particular career or not to do that one, just like if you're Hmong, you probably heard from your parents yourself, you should be a doctor, teacher, lawyer, right? So those are kind of always the ones that we hear about. And so have to, dig a little deeper, even though parents always just say those 3 things, that's what they know. But they also, speak so much by their silence of not mentioning anything else. And so even though we're told to do this or do that for a career, parents' words or family actions help participants to make discoveries. So for example, my participant, the student named Sa, he realized that his brother was a farmer and it took a lot of hard labor. And that was something that he kind of chose to eliminate as a possibility for a career. And so I just want to note that the first theme really emphasizes that family continues to shape decisions for Hmong men. The second theme here is that having a significant other positively impacts your decisions. So 3 out of 4 participants were married. And they just, had positive things to say about their significant other. So it's not that I specifically pulled out the idea that they're married or not, but it was just having that additional person provided an additional layer of support for them to really push through. And for my participant who was not married at the time of the interview, he did, he said, it didn't really matter. I was so motivated. That was my passion. I knew what I wanted to do and I went for it. So having that person to reciprocate efforts and support allow these Hmong men to succeed. For my third theme here, struggles and challenges will come to pass. As you'll notice, my 3 participants that I did capture some quotes here, being an ELL is something that we all probably struggled with if we spoke a different language at home. That was something that, they came to kind of bypass. Sa had the experience through part-time job, balancing school and work and, just trying to make something out of yourself was also something that he went through. And then of course, just avoiding certain friends, because they were involved in negative aspects or, not your side of things was also important too. And those are still challenges that, people have to get through and surpass, but they did all pass those challenges. For my next theme, of course, you'll notice racial and gender diversity and role models are still needed. And it was something that came out in the conversations and interviews. You'll notice some quotes here, but because these Hmong men are working in the field of education, we have to realize education is a system built by white men and dominated by white women. So, you can ask yourself the question, how many, people of color are truly in educational institutions, especially men of color. When we look at elementary school, you see more females than men, period. Regardless of race and ethnicity. When you get to middle school, there's probably a little bit more, diversity there, but still, I don't know if you're going to see a lot of Asian, specifically a lot of Hmong teachers there. And then high school is no difference. You still have a little bit more diversity, but still, Even if you walked on campus today in a local Fresno County school, you might still see a lot more of another, ethnic than Hmong. And so some of the experience of these Hmong men speak to the continued need to really diversify education and the importance of inclusivity of all ethnicities and gender. Theme 5 that I revealed from the interviews is that identities do intersect. Being Hmong, being a man, and being a high school counselor, all of those identities work together, and you really can't pull them apart. And it's apparent in the interviews that I was able to collect. And so 3 out of 4 participants, they truly said, you know what, I can't just be a regular Hmong guy, or I can't just be a regular high school counselor. It's you, as much as they wanted to distinguish the 2 identities, they couldn't. For example, one of my participants would say, when I am out in the field and I see a student's parents and they're Hmong, it's like, yes, I'm Hmong too, and this, but at the same time, they know that I'm a professional in the educational field. And so there's that meshing of like, you have to behave a certain way, you have to be able to carry yourself a certain way in both roles. It was interesting that I wanted to point out for this, though, that one of my participants did feel that his identity as a Hmong man did not actually merge with being Hmong. But at the same time, with his school, he was only one of 2 Hmong professionals on that campus. And he would often actually have to help translate and interpret for Hmong parents when the need was there. So it really speaks to, even though he didn't see it, that it intersected, it truly did. Theme 6 that I found was that, supportive counselors are advocates for students. So because the Hmong come from a collective community, the sense of belonging seems to be a must. And for these Hmong men, the belief that their school supported them and made them feel as they belonged. And once they felt like that, it gave them the confidence to project that support and really build that confidence in their students. And so, when I got I always think of that old cliche, like you can't love someone until you have learned to love yourself. And this is like so true. The support and the building up of confidence is definitely important for Hmong men in order for them to be able to really truly advocate for their students. And then theme 7 that I found is that counseling is definitely a worthy career. This is the last theme that came out from all of the men's story. And these Hmong men didn't need to be thanked on a daily basis, or even if it meant that they were only thanked once an academic year or later in the next school year. They enjoyed what they did as a high school counselor. They were able to help students with college and career choices, but also be able to give back to the schools they served in, as well as the Hmong community, because now the Hmong community sees them as professional roles, and so it provided kind of role models for the Hmong communities. And, even for Hmong parents themselves who never had, the chance to experience education themselves, now we have these Hmong men who can serve in these role model capacities to truly educate the Hmong parents. So with those 7 themes, what I did was I narrowed it down and analyzed some more, and I said, what are the factors then that truly influence their decisions? And from all the interview responses, these are 3 factors that came out. The perception of how you view education is something that will always impact what kind of decisions you made. If you read all the interview quotes and whatnot that I've gathered, my participants definitely share that, their parents, their family valued education, and that positive perception is definitely infectious. And so it's kind of the concept of, is the glass half full or half empty? And so that's how they viewed it. The second factor is that family does still and continues to impact decisions for Hmong men. And then the third factor is that, race and ethnicity does impact identity. So that's something important, and you really can't, just let that off. Like I mentioned, 3 of my participants, they grew up with a lot of Hmong community members versus 1 participant who grew up more with other ethnicity groups. And so the 3 who grew up surrounded by many Hmong, they always felt that, you know, their Hmong identity did impact what they did, how they decided. And they kind of viewed the world through that lens. Whereas the one participant who didn't grow up with a lot of Hmong, he viewed the world from like, I'm an American, there's nothing else. And that's why maybe that's earlier when I mentioned that he didn't realize his identities meshed, was because of that. And so with that being said, I definitely have recommendations for research. You know, any continued study that looks into Hmong men, Hmong women, how they decide their careers and whatnot is definitely important. But I also have recommendations for school districts and school leaders and whatnot. You know, right now in Fresno Unified School District, where I am a full-time counselor at, my caseload is around 350 students. So that's kind of the average. And so ASCA, which is our National School Counselors Association, recommends 250 to 1 counselor. So we still have a lot of work to go on that, and school districts can definitely increase counselor load, counselor size, I mean, just the size, and then increase definitely going to be helpful. School counselors like myself and other staff, teachers, whatnot, we can definitely continue to promote career exploration for our Hmong youth, because it seems like from these interviews I've gathered that a lot of them were not sure what counseling was, but yet they pursued it and they carried on. Community organizations such as Stone Soup, the Fresno Center, those organizations can definitely help to support this, and they can continue to also promote diversity awareness for our youth. And then of course, higher education and, you know, institutions and professionals can also support in this work. They can continue that career exposure for our young Hmong men, and definitely intentionally target them for certain opportunities available on campus, whatnot. Those are important things that we definitely will continue. If you have any questions on this, you know, definitely feel free to reach out to me. I have tons and tons and tons of more quotes available from my participants. So thank you.
Thank you, My Kou, for sharing your research and very importantly, your findings and recommendations. So thank you, audience members. Now is your time to ask any questions from either Doreen's presentation or from My Kou. So if you have a question, you can either use the chat feature, you can raise your hand, or you can just unmute yourself. We have time, we have 5 minutes before we have to end the session.
I have a question for Doreen. I'm in my graduate program right now with HEAL. I'm trying to figure out how I can better support African-American women or that community. So how can we better support African-American women who feel less at an HSI institution?
That is a very good question. And, you know, one of the goals of my research, right? So I think for me, the biggest takeaway was to make sure you acknowledge them as Black women, as African-American women, referring to them as people of color or lumping them into that grouping is not very supportive. And then also, unless you really know, I think most Black women identify as Black women. And so even referring to them as African-American can seem a little less caring, especially when because I've worked with some folks who are, you know, they're from Haiti, they're from Canada even. So always referring to them as African-American, it's almost like, you know, referring to other ethnic groups when you're just generalizing them without actually, you know, saying who they are. So I think first and foremost, acknowledging that they are Black women, acknowledging that you see them, supporting, you know, any activities or programs they may have, speaking up for them as an ally, whether they're in the room or not. I think will go a long way for supporting them and helping them feel more seen and supported at an HSI.
You're talking, I'm trying to figure out how the language works. So is it not good to say African American? Because I'm trying to watch my own language as an educator. So have heard experience where they didn't like Black. Would Black be a good term to use, or?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And that's why you see a lot of American language where it says Black/African American. And I think, and it might apply to other groups as well, but the government has a way of labeling people of color, labeling folks. And so African American is a label that came up. I remember when I was in college, it was Afro-American, and that went to a different place. And so it's just, I don't want to say politically correct, but I think the term African American became more politically correct, and it washed out a lot of other ethnic or historical backgrounds that Black people have. We're not just all from Africa. Everybody roots from Africa, but they are also citizens or their families come from other states. So don't shy away. You can even ask, we're asking about pronouns now. So you can ask a person, how do they identify? Do they identify as Black or African American? And they may say something else. You may find out that they're Cuban or, Dominican Republic, Dominican, sorry. So yeah, don't worry about that as much, Denise. Just, ask the question. Be brave and courageous.
Okay, I get nervous. That's why I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right. Okay, do we still have more time for questions, Susanna?
I think we have time maybe for just one more question. So I'm not sure if someone else has a question. And again, Denise, if you would like to follow up with either My Kou or Doreen, please, I hope this is the start of a conversation. So if no one else has a question, I can go back to you, Denise, but let's see if there's time for maybe one more question.
Okay.
I have a question if I can ask. Thank you, ladies, for sharing your research with us. I'm part of cohort 13, and over the summer, I will be embarking on my dissertation journey. So maybe one day I will be here presenting on the other side as well. I wanted to ask, my shared interest with all of you is conducting a qualitative inquiry study. And I just wanted to get your insight on maybe some of the challenges that you came across during your research.
I think it really narrows down to what you are really passionate about. Definitely start where your passion is. That's important. And if you're looking at qualitative research, it looks like both of ours were, just have your potential participants in mind. I think that would help smooth things for you down the road. Because I know I was an expert in counseling, but I was looking at, the opposite gender. And so it's kind of like navigating, kind of like thinking ahead, I think, of more who your participants were, how you would access them. I think that really helps. And so those pre-planning, even though it's not going to be written down in your paper, that definitely helps smooth processes. And I'm sure Doreen has some ideas to add too.
Just very quickly, I would add, from my experience, I underestimated how challenging it would be to get participants. And I think that was the biggest thing. Like My Kou said, I knew who my audience was. I did the research to see what the numbers were and what the potential pool was. And it was very disheartening to beg and plead and get the minimum goal, to get to the minimum number of participants that I was shooting for. So, just don't give up hope. Just hang in there. It's part of the process. And, I did enjoy the qualitative a lot, much more. I even thought about doing mixed methods and then realized that was just suicidal for me. So I loved the qualitative format, and, I'd be happy to, like Dr. Hernandez said, connect with you to share more or to learn more or be a sounding board for you.
Thank you, ladies.
Well, before we close, I want to thank you all for attending this breakout session to engage in the research of students in the Educational Leadership Department to ignite change and support our fellow colleagues. If you will be receiving an attendee survey via email, so we ask that you complete that so that we can learn about our event today. I want to thank our presenters, very soon to be Dr. Chang and Dr. Hatcher, for their amazing work. And again, we hope that this is a conversation that you can continue beyond this Saturday afternoon. So thank you, everyone. We hope you join us for the Lunch and Learn, and then attend the last session as well as the closing. So thank you so much for being here.